If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to the channel. And if you're enjoying these stories, there's a link below to buy me a cup of coffee. This is the Chassidic Story Project with Barak Hullman, podcasting from Jerusalem, Israel. This podcast is sponsored by listeners just like you. To become a supporter of this podcast, please go to HasidicStory.com, HASIDIC story.com. You'll never know, you'll never know, you'll never know, you'll never know. Shalom Aleichem, my sweetest friends. It is time for some more Chassidic stories, Be'ezrat Hashem. This week I have 3 stories for you. But before I begin, and yes, believe it or not, there are still hostages in Gaza. There's still a war going on. We just had a siren from Yemen today, a missile coming from Yemen. It's amazing. So I'm dedicating this podcast episode, Be'ezrat Hashem, to the continued success of our soldiers in battle wherever they are, the returning of all of the hostages healthy and alive, the refuah shlema, the full recovery of everybody who's been injured or who is ill, the comforting of those who lost loved ones, and the continued unity of the Jewish people here in the land of Israel and all around the world. The first story is about somebody you probably haven't heard of. I hadn't heard of him till I came across the story. Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh of Alik, which was a town in Ukraine, and this story took place around 250 years ago. Now, Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh was a student of the Maggid Mezrich, who lived from 1704 to 1772. So even though I don't have the dates for him, he lived around those years. And of course, the Maggid was the successor, the eventual successor of the Heilige Baal Shem Tov, who lived from 1698 to 1760, and was the founder of the Chassidic movement, of course. And I should add another thing, really the founder of Chassidic stories. You know, one of the wonderful things about Chassidic stories, and there's many of them, is that word, exactly what I said, wonder. The Chassidic stories bring wonder back into Judaism, because the halachic Judaism can very many times be, am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to do that? How do I do this? How do I do that? And we can get very caught up in the details and forget the wonder, and that's one of the gifts of these stories. The Maggid of Mezrich had gathered around him some of the most brilliant spiritual lights of that generation, sending them out throughout Europe to teach Chassidut, mainly in Eastern Europe. And Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh was one of those students of the Maggid. Besides being a great Talmudic genius and a master of Kabbalah, he had a special talent. He was able to negate a decree from heaven. He was so good at this that the other students of the Maggid called Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh lovingly the thief, because he was able to break through the locks of the heavenly gates that none of the other tzaddikim, or even the Maggid himself, could do sometimes. Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh was a thief who stole from heaven. Now, as far back as anyone could remember, all of the Goyim in Alik hated the Jews. It was just Ukrainian culture. Jews equal hate. They grew up with it. They ate it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Some people said it was because of the church. There was a local priest in Alik that hated Jews. But whatever the source was, it was impossible for a Jew to walk down the main street of Alik without getting beaten up or robbed by the local Ukrainians. And so the Jewish quarter was constantly in fear, unable to freely move around the town or conduct their business affairs, because the non-Jews would beat them up, steal money, threaten them. But now, in addition to their regular problems, there was a new problem. There was a plague. And there were no vaccines in those days. There was no modern medicine in those days. Even today, as everybody knows, when we have a plague, many millions of people die. And the situation was unbearable. Young people, especially, Rahman al-Islam, Hashem should save us from these things, especially children, were dying by the dozens, and the doctors had no cure. The Jewish community, of course, was davening, fasting, adding to their mitzvot and acts of kindness, but nothing seemed to help. And of course, the local priest did not help either. Every Sunday in his sermon, he blamed the plague on the Jews, of course. The Jews don't clean themselves. The Jews eat only kosher food. The Jews steal. The Jews everything. How wonderful to blame everything on the Jews. Boy, if we could blame all the world's problems on the Jews, then we wouldn't have to deal with our own problems. And when the townspeople heard this, they hated the Jews even more. So the Jews flocked to Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh for help. He tried, he davened, he fasted, he meditated, he secluded himself. But at some point, he announced that nothing that he was trying could work. So he quoted Isaiah, and he said, Ve'etein Adam tachtecha, and I will put a man in your place. The anti-Semites should suffer instead of the Jews. And he ordered the congregation to bring 160 pure silver coins to him. And he set a deadline by the end of the day. And everyone went home to either sell what they had to or find some coins to bring it back to Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh in time to meet the deadline. Now this number 160, according to Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh, represents Tselem. Tselem, which means form, because we are created B'Tselem Elokim, in the form of God. And the numerical value, the gematria of Tselem, is 160, which connects to the divine image in which people were created. It only took less than an hour, much earlier than the deadline that Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh had set, and he received the money and then locked himself in his room. And the whole population of the Jewish quarter waited impatiently around his house to see what would happen. And sure enough, after 2 hours, he came out and announced that he wanted a volunteer, a young man or boy who could run very fast. And one boy stepped forward and volunteered himself. The Rebbe gave him the bag containing all of the coins, and then put his hands on both of the boy's shoulders, looked him squarely in the eyes, and told him that he wants him to run down the main street as fast as possible and throw the coins in all directions over his shoulder as he runs. No one understood what Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh's plan was, but the boy looked at the rabbi smiled, nodded his head in encouragement, the boy nodded back, took a few breaths, and then ran like the wind towards Main Street. There was, of course, a Ukrainian just waiting to beat up a Jew. And here he sees this boy running with a sack of something. He called his friends and they all started chasing him. But this boy was actually very fast. And when they heard the falling coins bouncing on the cobblestones, they completely forgot about the boy and started fighting over the money. Suddenly, there was no corner or place on that road that was empty of a fight, a wrestling match, or worse. The greed that had led them to rob the Jews was now turning them against each other. And then, without any explanation or any reason, 2 days later, the Jews stopped dying. And not only that, the Jews stopped getting sick, and the people that were sick began to recover. But what happened to the anti-Semites, especially the anti-Semites of Main Street? They started getting more sick and dying faster than ever before. As far as the Jews were concerned, this was an open miracle. Hashgacha Pratit, divine intervention, had turned the plague away from the Jews to the Goyim that had persecuted them for so long. And the priest was so infuriated he didn't know what to do. He did something he'd never done before. He went to the local baron and complained. He didn't like to do it because officially the baron had much more power than the priest, and he could fire him or worse. But on the other hand, if he succeeded in making the baron angry against the Jews, he might either kick them all out or kill them. So it was worth the risk. And indeed, the priest went to the baron, and the next day Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh got an official summons to appear before the baron for his trial. Now the Jews knew exactly what was going on. They were dying and sick. Now everyone else is dying and sick, and they're healthy and not dying. Obviously, Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh did something special, and now he was going to be taken for a trial. Everyone was worried. Some people wanted to declare a day of fasting and prayer. Others said they should flee the town. But Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh was calm and even smiling. You see, my friends, a true tzaddik knows that everything is in the hands of the Ribono Shel Olam, the Master of the Universe. Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh, after all, was called the thief, and not for nothing. He'd broken through the heavenly gates before, and he trusted that Hashem would not abandon his people now. And the day of the trial came and began. The priest was given the floor, began ranting against the Jews. They couldn't be trusted. They're dirty. They steal everyone's money. They don't believe in the church. They kill babies, drink their blood, and now they're the source of the plague. I'm sorry to interrupt my story. I have to say, when I'm telling these stories and I think about what's going on in the world and how much blood libel there is against the state of Israel, it mamish really amazes me. I shouldn't be amazed. This has been going on since ancient times, since Amalek. but I am still amazed. So, okay, sorry, for that, back to the story. The Baron turns to the rabbi, and he says, "Is this true?" And the rabbi said, "No, Your Honor, they're complete lies. Just ask him if he has any proof." And the priest says, "Proof? I have proof that they caused the plague. I have lots of proof. I have witnesses that saw a Jewish boy scattering money on the street, and that money was infected, and it caused a riot, and it made the plague spread to everyone. After that, the Jews stopped dying, and our people got sick and died even more than before." And I asked around, and people told me that this rabbi was behind it all. He gave the boy the money, he told him what to do, and he sent him on his mission. So the Baron turns to Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh and he says, "Is this true? Did you send the boy to scatter money and cause our people to die?" And the Baron didn't even give the rabbi a chance to answer. He turned to the priest and he said, "If this is true, it is fully within my power, and it is my decision to punish the Jews for what they've done. We're going to punish them severely, and I give you, my dear priest, the full power to carry out the verdict." The priest was so happy, he couldn't even conceal it. He was smiling from ear to ear. He stood up straight, folded his arms, puffed out his chest, and he looks at the rabbi and he says, "Just wait and see what we're gonna do to you." But the rabbi either had complete faith in Hashem or somehow knew what the Baron was thinking, because there was not the slightest bit of worry on his face. The gates of heaven may sometimes appear locked, but the thief knows how to break through. And what, in fact, was going on in the Baron's mind was that suddenly and unexplainably, he hated the priest. He had this thought: if the priest kills all the Jews or kicks them out, it's going to deprive him of one of his best sources of income from their taxes. The Jews paid their taxes faithfully. They didn't cause a lot of trouble. They were worth a lot more to him than this troublesome priest who was always stirring up problems. The Baron raised one finger and pointed at Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh, and he says, "I decree that the Jews should be punished measure for measure. Honorable priest, I hereby decree that you shall personally take 160 silver coins from your church and scatter them in the Jewish quarter and return the curse from where it came from, measure for measure." And of course the priest had to do as he was told, and from that day on, there were no more problems for the Jews of Alik. Hashem had turned everything around. The very same 160 coins that had been used to redirect the plague became the instrument of divine justice. The priest that sought to destroy the Jewish community became the unwitting agent of their salvation. And the number 160, Tselem Elokim, had protected those created in its image. Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh, the thief, had once again broken through the locked gates of heaven, not through force, but with emunah, with faith. May we all merit to see such clear divine justice in our own day, and may we trust, like Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh, the thief, when the gates of heaven seem locked, sincere prayer and emunah can break through any barrier. Be'ezrat Hashem. I have another story for you. The first one, which I read in a newsletter, was heard from Rabbi Meir Abasera, who I've told stories of, and was also a friend and mashpia of myself. So whenever I come across his name, it puts a big smile on my face. Back in the time of the Heilig Baal Shem Tov, in the mid-1700s, there was a God-fearing Jewish couple that came to the Rebbe with a tragic story. In those days in Eastern Europe, the pressure on the Jews to convert was immense. Missionaries went through the Jewish communities like wolves, looking to catch some vulnerable souls. And the son of this couple had converted to Christianity. He was always a different type of kid. He could never get enough attention, and when he wasn't in the center of attention, he was miserable. And his parents and teachers tried to do their best, but whenever the teacher called on other students, or the parents paid attention to his siblings, he was enraged. Pain of not being special, not being seen, ate away from him on the inside. And when the missionaries came around, he was easy prey. They bombed him with love, told him how amazing he was, did everything possible to entrap his Jewish soul. They knew exactly what he needed to hear and exactly how they made him to feel, and they made him feel like he was the most important person in the entire world. And his parents saw what was happening, but they were helpless to stop him until one day he was gone. No one even knew where he went. Can you imagine, my sweetest friends, the heartbreak? Their own child, the soul that they had merited to bring into this world, vanished into darkness, a darkness that they couldn't even penetrate. And now they were standing before the Heilige Baal Shem Tov and asking for his help. And the father said, "To tell you the truth, Rebbe, we're really angry at him. How could he do such a thing to us? Such a transgression." And then the mother said, "And after all we've done for him?" The father said, "He was such a difficult child. He caused us so much aggravation. We actually stopped mentioning his name in the house. And we kind of hope that he won't return." So the Baal Shem Tov says to them, "So what are you doing here?" And they said, "Well, we are parents. We do love our son, of course. He makes us angry, but we love him. We haven't completely given up. That's why we're here. Maybe you can bless him or do something to get the insanity out of his mind." The Baal Shem Tov thought for a few seconds and he said, "If you want to return him, only your love will bring him back. You said you love him. Now you have to love him even more than before." The Baal Shem Tov wasn't giving them practical advice. He was revealing to them a Kabbalistic secret that love is the most powerful force in the universe, but not the love that depends on something. The love that flows unconditionally, regardless of what a person does. When the parents left the Baal Shem Tov's room in a daze, how could they love somebody that had disappointed them so deeply and fully, who had become a stranger, even an enemy? But whatever they were doing wasn't going to help, so they decided to give it a try. Every morning they woke up early and said the entire book of Tehillim, of Psalms, for their son, and the rest of the day they mentioned him with love and admiration in the house. Instead of being angry, they davened, and instead of giving up, they kept on loving him. It wasn't easy. Some days, the anger really wanted to come back, but they remembered the Baal Shem Tov's words and continued. But despite their efforts, there were no results. The weeks passed, the months passed, the seasons changed from spring to summer, summer to fall, and still no word of their son, no sign whatsoever. And sometimes they started doubting themselves. Were they just fooling themselves? Who is this Baal Shem Tov? Maybe it was wrong. But having no real choice, they continued every morning with the Psalms, every day, speaking of their son with love. They would tell visitors about their wonderful son, about his brilliant mind, his beautiful singing voice, the funny things he used to say as a child. They spoke as if he had just stepped out for a moment and would return any minute. But the pain sometimes was unbearable. Some nights the mother would wake up crying and the father would hold her and say, "The Baal Shem Tov said, our love will bring him back. We have to have faith." And in the morning they would start again with saying the Psalms. And then late one stormy winter night, months and months later, the wind began to howl and whistle outside. It was so fierce they couldn't sleep. It seemed as though the world outside was falling apart, and at any moment their old wood hut would implode. And suddenly they heard a loud thud at the door, as if a large animal was trying to get in. And then they heard a faint knocking sound. It was hard to make out over the screaming wind, but there it was again. Unmistakably, someone was knocking on their door. The father went to open the door. He lifted the bolt, braced himself, and as soon as he opened the door, clouds of snow and ice thundered in like a hurricane, and along with it came a person. And then, unexplainably, as soon as the person came in, the storm suddenly stopped. It was no problem to close the door. There was a person with a hood over his head, shivering like a leaf and crying like a baby. And when he removed his hood, they could not believe it. It was their son, the son that they had said Kaddish over, the son that they had prayed for with every fiber of their being, was delivered to their door by the very storm itself. And when he warmed up and calmed down, he told his parents that he wanted to leave the church a long time ago, but the priests wouldn't let him go. In fact, they locked him in a high room in a monastery and said they would never release him unless he repented. And he was there for so many months, he never thought that he would ever get out. And then, when he was ready to just give up, suddenly a powerful wind began to blow through the high window of his cell, so strong that it burst the windows open, swept him out through the window, and carried him for miles until he slammed against the front door of his own parents' house. Just like the Heilige Baal Shem Tov had promised, their love had brought him back. The same wind that seemed to be destroying everything was actually breaking all the barriers to bring their son home. I have one more short story for you, and this is another story about the Maggid Mezrich. The Maggid was a very intensely holy person who slept only a few moments each night. He was constantly involved in Torah, davening, or meditation. His soul existed in multiple worlds at the same time. Even while speaking with his students, part of him was always in the highest heavenly chambers. And he had 60 holy Chassidim. Each was a genius with Ruach HaKodesh, divine intuition, and knew all of the books of Judaism. And these weren't ordinary students. Each one would become a great Rebbe in his own right, spreading Chassidus throughout Eastern Europe. And all of them, one by one, would take care of the Maggid Mezrich. So when it was the turn of the famous tzaddik, Rabbi Elimelech of the Janks, who lived from 1717 to 1786, would later be the author of the holy book, Noam Elimelech, the Maggid suddenly broke out of an unusual deep state of meditation in which he was completely detached from this physical world, and turns to Rabbi Elimelech and says, Elimelech, do you hear what they're saying in the heavenly court? They're saying that the commandment of Ahavat Yisrael, of loving another Jew, means that you have to love a complete sinner, just like you love a complete tzaddik. Now you have to understand what a revolution this was. In that moment, the Maggid was transmitting a teaching that would reshape how Chassidim understood their mission in this world. The commandment wasn't just to love the righteous, the learned, the orthodox, the observant, the people that are like you. It was to love every Jewish soul with the same infinite, unconditional love. And afterwards, when Rabbi Elimelech told the other Chassidim what the Maggid had said, they decided from then on they would change their priorities, widen their horizons, and devote their time and energy towards bringing Jews closer and closer through Ahavat Yisrael. This was a complete revolution at the time. You know, today we take for granted what Chabad and other organizations do around the world. Of course, Chabad houses and their outreach, everyone knows you can go to Bangkok or Montana and you'll find a Chabad house. That's where the Maggid's teaching is alive in action, where every Jew, no matter how far from tradition or how close, is welcomed with open arms and unconditional love. But it all started here, my sweetest friends, with the early Rebbes who heard this revolutionary message from heaven itself. May we all merit to love with such powerful love, and may all the lost souls find their way back home, carried by the winds of unconditional Ahavat Yisrael. Thank you so much for listening, my sweetest friends. As always, it was my absolute pleasure to tell the stories this week. Thank you again, of course, to all the supporters of the podcast and everyone who sends in a donation. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the people that leave comments and contact me and say hi to me. Thank you to everyone, really. No matter who you are or where you are, thank you for listening. I hope you have a beautiful Shabbos and a beautiful week. And until next week, my sweetest friends, take care of yourselves. And sei gesund.